In this video we'll be looking at solving equations using method 1. Now if you want a description of the difference between what I call method 1 and method 2, then look at video 2-1 on the same site. Now just as a quick reminder then, what we're looking at is how to solve equations that look like this. 2x minus 1 is equal to 3. Now remember, as I said on a previous video, that's the same as 3 equals 2x minus 1. So don't be thrown if they write the equation around this way. And also don't be thrown if they use a different letter for the unknown. It can be any letter, although we do avoid O and I and L and E. Right, so 2x minus 1 is equal to 3. What we're looking at this video is how to solve that using method 1, and that's by looking at doing whatever we do to one side of the equation, we do the same to the second side of the equation. So I'm going to be calling the equations the left hand side and the right hand side. So for instance, if I add 10 to the left hand side, then I'd have 2x minus 1 plus 10 is equal to 3 plus 10. Now that's entirely valid because whatever I've done to the left hand side, I've done to the right. So if you think of these as balances, if I put more on the left hand side, I have to put more on the right hand side as well to keep it balanced. Now if I now tidy that up by simplifying each side of the equation, I get 2x equals 9, 2x plus 9 is equal to 13. Now that's not going to actually help me. I haven't made the question any easier. I haven't got any closer to finding out what x is, but I haven't done anything mathematically wrong. I could also say, well, I'm going to double both sides. So I'm going to double the left hand side, I'm going to double the right hand side. Now doubling the right hand side, timesing the right hand side by 2 is easy, that's 26. But when you times the left hand side by 2, you have to be careful. Now there's a couple of ways of thinking about it. If you times the left hand side, you're timesing the whole of the left hand side by 2. So I could write it like that as a bracket. And that's the way I would like you to think about it. If you're timesing the left hand side by 2, you're timesing the whole of the left hand side by 2. Okay? Now, I can now expand that bracket and get 4x plus 18 is equal to 26. Now, if you can't remember how to expand brackets like that, then look at the expanding bracket video in this first part of the series. It's in, I can't remember what number it is, but it's one of the earlier videos. Now if you could have looked at this here and thought, well, instead of writing it as a bracket, you'll notice that whatever we do to the right hand side, doubling it, we can do to the left hand side. So we can double the 2x to get 4x, and we can double the 9 to get 18. That's a very important concept when you're working on equations. Whatever you do to the left hand side, you have to do to the right hand side. Now when you're adding here, you didn't have to add 10 to both of the terms in the equation, in this side of the equation, because what you're doing basically is adding 10 to that left hand side. But when you're timesing by 2, you do have to multiply every term by 2. And it's the same when you're dividing as well. If we have this expression now and I say, well, actually everything's even, so I can halve the right hand side and get 13. What I can do is I can halve the 4x to get 2x, but I also have to halve the 18 to get 9. So what I've done to both sides there is I've divided by 2. But the important thing is I've divided this term by 2, and this term by 2, and this term by 2. Now, I said that I wanted you to write it like this. You can write 4x plus 18 divided by 2 like that equals 26 divided by 2, or you could write half of 4x plus 18 equals a half of 26. Now some people prefer the fractions when they're working with equations because now they can expand that bracket. They can do a half of 4 is 2x, and a half of 18 is 9, and a half of 26 is 13. But the key concept I want you to get here is that when we're working with equations with this method, whatever we do to one side of the equation, we have to do to the other side to keep it balanced. But you have to do that correctly. If you're multiplying the left-hand side, you must multiply every term. If you're dividing, you must divide every term. If you're adding and subtracting, then you can just add that on to the end of the expression you've already got. So what we've done at the moment is just added or subtracted from both sides of this equation. We haven't got any closer to solving that equation. But before we look at that, let's just make sure that you can work with equations properly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to write an equation down here. So 2x equals 6. And in the brackets, I'm going to write what I want you to do to both sides. I'm going to write a few questions, and I want you to work out what the new equation would be when you do that to both sides. So I want you to add 10 to both sides. Then for part B, I want you to take away 5 from both sides. And part C, I want you to times both sides by 3. And part D, I want you to divide both sides by 2. And I want you to write the equations again. So I'm just basically making sure that you can do the same to both sides. So whatever you do to the left hand side, you do to the right hand side. And in the bracket here is I'm telling you what I want you to do to both sides. When you've done those 4, restart the video to see if you're correct. Hopefully you've done that. Now here's the first question. If I add 10 to the left hand side, I get 2x plus 10. And if I add 10 to the right hand side, I get 16. Now I haven't solved that equation. In fact, if anything, I've made that equation more complicated. But I have shown that whatever I do to the left hand side, I can do to the same to the right hand side. Now on this one, I'm going to take 5 from both sides. Well, if I write 2x plus 1 take 5, that's the same as 1 take away 5. So I can write that as 2x take away 4, and 12 take away 5, 7. So that's the answer to that one. I've taken 5 from both sides. Now you may have written the left hand side as that, which is fine, but you can simplify it by doing 1 take away 5. So well done if you got those first 2 right. Now question 3 is a little bit more complicated. Just remember that we're timesing the whole of the left hand side by 3. So not just the 2x, but also the take away 3. So we get 6x, and 3 3s are 9. So we get 6x take away 9, and 4 3s are 12. Now if you've got that wrong, it might be because you've just got the 6x, but you haven't got take away 9, you've got take away 3. If you got that wrong, then you have to remember to divide every term, multiply every term on the left hand side by 3. Now the last question was to divide by 2. So 14 divided by 2 is 7, but we must also divide the 8 by 2 to get negative 4, or take away 4, and then 20 divided by 2 gives us 10. So if you've got those 4 correct, or if you can see why those 4 now are correct, then you've got the basics that you need in order to solve simpler equations, simple linear equations. So let's get on to some more interesting questions. Let's start with 2x minus 1 equals 5. Now we're aiming somewhere down here to get x is equal to something. Now this is a 2-step equation because there's 2 things that we're going to have to do in order to get x on its own. If you look at the left hand side, the right hand side's got no unknowns in it, so we don't have, well, we do have to do things to it, but we don't have to concern ourselves too much. The right hand side will just follow the left hand side. Now if you look at it, we've got 2x's take away 1. So the first thing that we should do here is get rid of this take away 1. If we can remove this take away 1, then we'll just be left with 2x. Now we can't just rub it out, we have to do something mathematically. Now the opposite of taking away 1 is adding 1. So what I'd like you to do, because you're working along with me, is carefully add 1 to both sides of that equation. Now I'm going to write it in brackets to the side. Other teachers will write it underneath, and I've got no problems with that if you'd like to write it underneath. In fact, I'll do both to start off with. So if you've got 2x, take away 1, add 1, you end up with 2x, add nothing, or 2x. And that was the whole point. The whole point of that was to get rid of that take away 1. So if we add 1 to a negative 1, we get nothing. So now we're just left with 2x on this side of the equation. But we're not finished yet, because remember, whatever we do to the left-hand side, we must also do to the right-hand side. So 5 plus 1 is 6. Okay, so now we've got 2x is equal to 6. We've made it one step easier. Now a lot of students at this point immediately know the answer without it going any further. But let's just continue the method one step further. And we get 2x equals to 6. Well, what is the opposite of timesing by 2? Because that's what 2x means. There's 2 lots of x. 2 lots of this number x. So the opposite of timesing by 2 is dividing by 2. So we're going to divide both sides by 2. You've got to do that carefully. So if you divide 2x's by 2, then you're left with 1x. Now remember, we could have written 1x like that, but in most times we don't need to write the 1, so we don't write the 1. And 6 divided by 2 is 3. Now if you weren't sure what 6 divided by 2 was, you can always write it like that, because remember the division symbol looks like a fraction with the number above and below, because divisions and fractions are the same. And then 6 divided by 2 is 3. So x equals 3. Now the reason why I show you that is later on, when you get some answers which aren't whole number answers, then you can leave them as fractions. So there's the first question done. 2x minus 1 equals 5. We've added 1 to both sides first, then we've divided by 2, and we get the answer that x is equal to 3. Now you can check that makes sense by doing 2 3s are 6, take away 1 does give 5. So they're the most basic two-step problems. Here's another one. 3x plus 1 equals 10. Now you might want to try that one on your own now. If you do, pause your video, because in a second I'm going to go through it with you. Right, I'm going to go through it now. Well, we want to get rid of this plus 1 from both sides first, so we're going to take away 1 from both sides. That gives us 3x equals 9. Now the next thing we want to do is have 1x. So we've got this is currently 3 lots of x, so the opposite of timesing by 3 is dividing by 3. So now we're going to divide both sides by 3, and you can write it down underneath. 3x is divided by 3 will be 1x, and 9 divided by 3, well, 9 divided by 3, which is 3. So the answer is x is equal to 3. Well done if you got that one on your own. Hopefully you understood that. Here's another example. 4x minus 3 equals 11. See if you can do that one on your own. And if not, here we go. What's the opposite for taking away 3? It's adding 3. So we're going to add 3 to, but the important thing is we're adding 3 to both sides. That gives us 4x is equal to 14. Now what's the opposite to timesing by 4? Yep, it's dividing by 4. So now we're going to divide 4x by 4 to get x. Now 14 divided by 4 is not a whole number. So you can write it as a fraction. You can simplify that fraction, or you can write it as a decimal. So x is equal to 3.5 in this case. Well done if you managed to get that one right. The next one then. Let's say a divided by 3 minus 1 equals 6. Right, so we're going to work through this one this time. Now these are the basic two-step problems again. So a divided by 3, take away 1 equals 6. So first of all, don't worry about this being a fraction here. We want to get rid of this take away 1 to begin with. So we're going to add 1 to both sides. We get a over 3 is equal to 7. And now what is the opposite to dividing by 3? It's timesing by 3. So we're going to times both sides by 3, and that gives us A, because if we got 3 lots, if you do 3A divided by 3, we get A, which is the reason why we times by 3, just to get A on its own, and 3 7s are 21. So that's the answer. And again, we can check it, because 21 divided by 3 is 7, and 7 take away 1 is 6. So the left hand side is 6, and that is equal to the right hand side, which is also 6. Now some people find solving equations with fractions up the hardest part. Now because it's difficult, and because there's certain things you have to be careful of, then I am going to record some videos specifically on solving equations with fractions. So go and watch those if that's what you find difficult. Right, one more working on together then. Okay, well, 2 plus 4b equals 12. Now don't be thrown that the order's changed. We still got 2 plus 4b, so we still want to get rid of this 2. Now this 2 is a positive 2, so to get rid of this positive 2, we still have to take away 2. So we're taking 2 from both sides. So that gives us 4b is equal to 10. And we want to know what b is. So we've got to divide both sides by 4, because we've currently got 4 of them. So we have to do the opposite to timesing by 4, which is dividing by 4. And you might say, well, why? What do you mean opposite of timesing by 4? Well, this is 4 lots of b, 4 times by b. So we need to do the opposite of that. So we get b, and we get 10 over 4, which is 5 over 2, which is 2.5. So b equals 2.5. Now last one together. And that's 10 equals 3x minus 1. And again, don't be thrown by the fact that the 10 is on the left hand side. We're not trying to, the 10 is as simple as it can be. There's no unknowns on the left hand side now, all the unknowns on the right hand side. So we're going to work on the right hand side, but we're going to do, whatever we're going to do to the right, we're also going to do the left, because it's got an equals. So again, we're adding 1 to both sides. So we get 11 equals 3x, because we've done it to both sides. And now we're going to divide both sides by 3, and we get 11 divided by 3 equals x. And if you prefer, you can write that as x equals 11 divided by 3. And that's how I'm going to leave that answer. And that's a completely valid answer, so you can write that in an exam. The next video will be looking at solving equations with brackets. The next one using this method will be solving equations with brackets, and then we'll look at unknowns on both sides. But before we stop, you really must always check that you understand this by doing some questions. So I'm going to write down 5 questions that I'd like you to do, and when you're confident that you've got the right answers, you can check with my answers. So they're the 5 questions. See if you can get those 5 right, and then if you have, then you understood this first video. And there are the answers. X equals 8, x equals 5, x equals 5, x equals 7, and x equals 2. Now if you haven't got any of those correct, just go back and rewatch the video and see if you can work out what you're doing wrong. Remember, whatever you do to the left hand side, you have to do to the right hand side. And if you still don't understand, come and see me at lunchtime, and I can try and work out with you what you're doing wrong.